Usually when we look at ancient religious texts, we have this expectation of, passive history. It is like wandering through a museum.
Right, yeah. You see a dusty artifact behind glass.
Exactly. You read the little placard detailing what year it was dug up, and you just move on to the next exhibit.
Yeah, it gets treated as a static relic, something entirely disconnected from the actual mechanics of our modern reality.
But when you step into the world of biblical prophecy, specifically the metaphorical architecture of the tabernacle and all these incredibly intricate ancient rituals, that whole museum concept just shatters.
It really does.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're someone who loves unlocking the hidden functional mechanisms behind ancient texts, you are really going to appreciate this one.
Absolutely. We are looking at a set of source materials today, a dense, deeply theological transcript that treats these texts not as history, but as a highly encrypted schematic.
Yeah, our mission today is to extract the core operating logic behind these symbols. We are not just doing a historical inventory here.
No, not at all.
We want to discover why incredibly specific details, like a priest's incense, a heavy torn curtain, and the ringing of a tiny bell, were used to articulate profound, universal concepts about human intention, truth, and obedience. Okay, let's unpack this.
I think the best entry point is to look at how the source text redefines language itself, specifically the concept of a parable.
Right, because when most people encounter the word parable, they default to thinking of a simple moral fable.
Yeah, a nice, easily digestible story about being kind to your neighbors or, not being greedy.
But the source material rejects that entirely. It suggests that reading these parables as fables is a fundamental misunderstanding of their purpose.
Completely. The text argues we need to treat them like encrypted digital files that are strictly time-locked.
Time-locked, I love that analogy.
And the source roots this idea in a specific biblical mechanism. It points to John 14.29, where Jesus explicitly states his operating procedure. He says he speaks in advance so that when the event actually happens, people will believe. The prophecy has zero utility until the moment of its fulfillment.
It is like downloading a massive, highly anticipated software update, but the operating system physically will not allow you to install or even view the contents until a predetermined launch date.
That is exactly it. And the source draws a really sharp distinction here between spiritual infancy and spiritual maturity.
The milk versus solid food concept.
Right. It argues that engaging with the earthly physical rituals, like the literal burning of sacrifices or the literal incense, was just drinking milk.
It was a placeholder.
Yeah, a placeholder for an era when humanity simply lacked the capacity to process the underlying reality. The actual fulfillment is the solid food.
The text insists that if you are still just analyzing the mechanics of the physical rituals, you are stuck in the infancy stage. You are studying the shadow instead of the object casting it.
Exactly.
But wait, how are we supposed to know when this reality actually happens? Are we just guessing? Couldn't literally any generation in history claim that their specific era is the preordained time and that their specific interpretation is the solid food?
That is a fair question.
Like, how does the source text differentiate between genuine prophetic fulfillment and just, extreme confirmation bias?
Well, that is the structural vulnerability of any prophecy, which is why the text lays out a specific historical framework to defend against it.
Okay, lay it on me.
According to the transcript, humanity has spent roughly 6,000 years in a relentless, repeating cycle of betrayal and disbelief.
Just constantly messing up.
Pretty much. The logic presented is that an unchangeable divine will cannot rely on human oral tradition or subjective interpretation because humans constantly distort the message.
So if you are playing a 6,000-year-long game with a humanity that constantly forgets or rewrites the rules, you have to build something physical.
Precisely. You need a physical ledger that cannot be altered retroactively. These prophecies and incredibly dense physical rituals were deliberately left as immovable breadcrumbs across history. The fulfillment has to match the bizarre, highly specific details of those physical parables perfectly.
Because the complexity of the physical rituals acts as a cryptographic signature.
Yes, exactly. When the reality finally arrives, the sheer statistical impossibility of the match proves the design.
That explains why the architecture of the tabernacle was so relentlessly specific.
Yeah.
I mean, if it is meant to be an unalterable physical ledger for a future spiritual reality, every single millimeter matters.
It does. And the text spends a vast amount of time dissecting the tabernacle.
If you mentally map out the blueprints of this space based strictly on the text, you aren't just looking at a building. It is like you are looking at a highly restricted escape room.
An escape room, that is a really interesting way to visualize it.
Right, because based strictly on the text, you have two distinct zones. You have the outer courtyard, which is accessible, public, and deals with the messy physical aspects of sacrifice.
But as you move inward, the restrictions become extreme.
Exactly. You enter the first tabernacle, the holy place. You have the golden lampstand with the 7 lamps, and the table with the 12 loaves of showbread.
It is highly curated.
It is. But beyond that, separating this first zone from the ultimate inner sanctum is a massive, heavy veil.
And behind that heavy veil is the second tabernacle, the Holy of Holies.
The items kept in the Holy of Holies are fascinating when you look at them through this lens of a physical ledger.
Oh, absolutely.
You have the Ark of the Covenant, you have a golden pot holding manna, the miraculous sustenance from the wilderness.
Right.
You have Aaron's wooden rod that defied nature by budding leaves. And you have the stone tablets of the law.
Looking at this inventory, these aren't just holy objects. They are all physical evidence of human rebellion being subdued by divine intervention.
Which is a crucial distinction. The Holy of Holies wasn't a treasury of wealth. It was a vault containing the definitive proof of God's authority over human flaw.
And the author of the book of Hebrews, which our source text analyzes extensively, points out the inherent limitation of all this physical architecture.
Okay, how so?
Hebrews 9 argues that no matter how elaborate the physical layout was, and no matter how strictly the priests washed in the bronze basins or burned sacrifices, none of it could actually cleanse a human conscience.
Because physical water can't wash away a psychological or spiritual reality.
Exactly. The source emphasizes that these rituals were a mandatory temporary shadow.
A shadow.
Yeah, they forced humans to practice the rhythms of obedience, but they couldn't execute the internal transformation. They were an external placeholder waiting for a new era, a mechanism that could actually rewrite human nature from the inside out.
But even as a placeholder, the consequences of interacting with this space were absolute.
Mm-hmm.
The Holy of Holies wasn't just an exclusive VIP room. It functioned more like a spiritual quarantine zone.
Or a nuclear reactor core.
Yes. The divine presence inside was considered absolute, unfiltered perfection, and human flaw was the ultimate, lethal contaminant.
The text details that absolutely no one could enter the Holy of Holies except the high priest. And even then, only on one specific day a year.
And he couldn't just walk in to check the inventory. He had to wear essentially a spiritual hazmat suit.
Right.
The source details how he had to carry a golden censer, a specialized vessel for burning incense.
He had to fill it with fire and incense to create a literal thick cloud of smoke to obscure his vision and shield himself.
Because without that smoke acting as a buffer between his flawed humanity and the absolute perfection of the divine, the text implies an immediate catastrophic reaction. He would die instantly.
It is a stark representation of the chasm between human nature and divine law in that era. The smoke was the only acceptable mediator.
The functional mechanics of how they handled this danger are terrifying. This is my favorite detail from the source. The high priest wore a specialized garment lined with tiny bells at the hem.
Oh, the bells, yeah.
And crucially, a rope was tied securely around his ankle or waist.
Right, because you have all the other priests standing outside that massive heavy veil, completely blind to what is happening inside the reactor core.
It is like a deep-sea diver or an astronaut on a terrifying spacewalk. All they have is the auditory feedback, the ringing of those bells, ding-dong, as the high priest moves around in the smoke.
The auditory feedback was the only metric they had to confirm that the ritual was being accepted and the priest was still alive.
If that ringing suddenly stopped and there was dead silence, they knew immediately. The hazmat suit had failed.
He had entered with unwashed sin, or his intention was flawed, and the contaminant had reacted with the divine.
He was dead. And because no one else was authorized to cross that barrier, they couldn't go in for a rescue. They had to physically drag his lifeless body out from under the veil by the rope.
The psychological weight of that ritual on the community must have been staggering.
Unimaginable.
But the source text doesn't dwell on the terror of the ancient practice. It uses it to contrast with the ultimate fulfillment in the New Testament. The paradigm shifts entirely.
We move from the shadow to the reality.
Exactly. The text brings in Jesus, framing him as the ultimate high priest, but notably not in the traditional lineage of Aaron. He is placed in the order of the mysterious Genesis figure, Melchizedek.
Okay, so what is the critical difference there?
The difference is that instead of carrying the blood of an animal into a physical tent to act as a temporary buffer, Jesus sacrificed himself. He becomes both the priest and the sacrifice.
And the source text highlights a very specific physiological and architectural event to prove this transition. It points to Matthew chapter 27.
Right, the crucifixion.
Yeah, the moment Jesus is crucified and dies on the cross, the physical veil of the temple in Jerusalem, that massive barrier separating the public from the Holy of Holies, tears completely in half from top to bottom.
And the text relies on Hebrews 10:20 to decode this event. That massive physical veil represented the physical flesh of Jesus.
Wow.
So when his flesh was destroyed, the physical barrier of the first tabernacle was simultaneously dismantled.
Think about the psychological terror and liberation of that exact moment for the people who understood how lethal that room was.
Well, it would be mind-blowing.
The nuclear reactor core of the divine is suddenly unshielded. The veil is gone. The ancient system of relying on a single flawed human with a rope around his waist to mediate for you is obsolete.
The physical ledger served its purpose, and the spiritual reality was activated. The way into the Holy of Holies is permanently exposed and open to the saints.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The veil is torn, the barrier is gone, but the source text pivots heavily back to the symbol of the golden censer.
It does, yeah.
Even without the physical temple, the mechanism of the censer remains crucial. We know the incense represents the prayers of the people, but you cannot produce smoke by just staring at a bowl of incense. You need an ignition source.
You need fire.
You need fire. And where does the fire come from? The rules regarding the origin of that fire are absolute.
The text is uncompromising on this point. The fire in the censer must originate from the altar. It cannot be strange fire or a spark struck from a priest's own flint.
So if we are dealing with internal realities now, what does that altar fire actually represent?
The source explains that the fire from the altar represents the word of God burning internally within a person.
The word of God, okay.
It cites John 15:7, which argues that if the word remains in you, your prayers will be answered. The fire is the internalized, objective truth of the divine law. You place your incense, your prayers onto that specific objective fire, and it creates the fragrant smoke that is acceptable.
But wait, what if someone just prays for whatever they want without that specific fire? What about raw, sincere human passion?
What do you mean?
Like, what if someone is deeply emotional, incredibly earnest, and they pray for something they truly believe is good, but they don't possess that specific fire of the word? They are using their own internal flame, their own subjective desires.
Well, the text views that subjective passion as incredibly dangerous. It brings in Proverbs 28:9, which states that turning a deaf ear to the law makes even a person's prayer an abomination.
An abomination. That is a brutal categorization for someone who is ostensibly just asking for help or trying to do good.
It is brutal, but the source text isolates this specific behavior because it represents a fundamental corruption of the system.
Yeah.
Without the fire of the word, a prayer is not aligning with divine will. It is merely an ego-driven demand wrapped in religious language.
Oh, I see.
To illustrate the catastrophic results of this, the text highlights the cautionary tale of King Saul from 1 Samuel 15.
The Saul narrative perfectly encapsulates this danger. Saul is given a direct, explicit command by God through the prophet Samuel. Destroy an enemy nation completely, including all their livestock. Leave nothing.
And Saul disobeys the command. But he doesn't do it by openly renouncing God or worshiping an idol.
That is the insidious part.
Oh.
Saul keeps the absolute best sheep and cattle alive, and his rationalization is brilliant in its deception.
Very clever.
He claims he saved the best of the plunder, specifically to sacrifice them to God on the altar. He essentially says, I know what the command was, but I thought of a way to optimize it. God loves sacrifices, so I am upgrading the worship experience.
Right, he weaponizes the aesthetics of religion to mask his own defiance. Saul substitutes his subjective judgment for an objective, divine command, and then tries to manage God's reaction by offering a grand religious gesture.
And the response from the prophet Samuel is devastating. God rejects Saul entirely. The text explicitly equates Saul's brand of stubborn rebellion, doing things your own way and slapping a holy label on it, to the sin of witchcraft.
Equating an unauthorized animal sacrifice to witchcraft seems extreme until you look at the mechanism behind both actions.
How so?
Witchcraft at its core is the attempt to manipulate unseen spiritual forces to serve your own personal will.
Oh, wow.
Saul was trying to manipulate God. He was using the ritual of sacrifice as a bribe to force God to accept his disobedience. The text hammers home the absolute principle. Obedience is better than sacrifice. You cannot offer acceptable incense on a fire of your own making.
So on a cosmic scale, the fire in the censer isn't your personal ambition. It isn't the volume of your prayer, the intensity of your emotions, or how many philanthropic deeds you can point to. It is strict, unyielding obedience to the foundational truth.
Exactly.
Without that specific fire, the censer doesn't just fail to produce acceptable smoke, it actually becomes a weapon of judgment. The text references Revelation 8.5 from the source, where an angel takes the censer, fills it with the fire from the altar, and hurls it down to the earth.
And the collision of this divine fire with the earth causes thunder, rumblings, lightning, and earthquakes.
The incense, mixed with the uncompromising fire of the word, becomes a disruptive, world-altering force.
Yeah, and the text then transitions from the cosmic angel to the human level, describing the Apostle Paul.
Right, Paul refers to himself as a jar of clay.
Yes. In the context of this cipher, Paul is walking around as a human censer. He is carrying this intense, volatile, divine treasure, the fire of the word, inside a highly fragile physical body.
The text points out that Paul emits a spiritual aroma, the aroma of Christ. His entire life, his suffering, his obedience becomes the incense burning on that internal fire.
And crucially, it is an aroma that only God can accurately judge because humans only see the clay jar, not the fire inside.
So what does this all mean? We have journeyed from the idea of parables as encrypted, time-locked files, through the psychological quarantine zone of the tabernacle, analyzed the fatal physics of the Holy of Holies with the bells and the rope, and examined the self-deception of King Saul to understand the golden censer.
It is a lot of ground to cover.
It is. How does this intricate theological schematic actually apply to you, the listener, today?
It serves as a profound, uncompromising check on our own intentions. It is an audit of our internal lives.
It strips away all the external validation. It forces you to look at your prayers, your deepest daily requests and desires, the things you publicly advocate for. Are they actually aligned with foundational truths, burning on the objective fire of obedience?
Or are they just strange fire?
Right. Are they just empty smoke, fueled by our own selfish rebellions and ego, cleverly disguised as good deeds, just like King Saul's sheep?
True learning, the solid food that the source text advocates for, means moving past the shadow of outward performances and arriving at the reality of internal transformation. It is ensuring the fire within you is not of your own making.
And that leads to a final provocative implication that this text circles around but requires us to fully synthesize. If the physical veil is truly torn and the ancient architectural ledgers of stone and gold are obsolete, the source reveals that the human body itself is now the temple.
1 Corinthians 3.16, God's Spirit dwells within it.
The geographical location of the Holy of Holies has fundamentally relocated.
It is a massive paradigm shift.
Think about the weight of that. If the veil is torn, and you are now the architecture, you are the Holy of Holies. You are the altar. You are the golden censer all at once. You are walking around carrying the reactor core.
That changes everything.
If that is the reality, how does that change the way you walk into an ordinary room tomorrow morning? If you are the vessel carrying the fire, where exactly is the boundary between the mundane and the sacred now?
That is a vital question to leave them with.
Something to carefully mull over as you navigate your day. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.